right now we'll continue talking NFC East with Gary Myers. You can follow him on Twitter at Gary Myers NY. New York Times bestselling author of how about, of course, the Brady versus Manning book. You got the brand new podcast out there, Brady versus Manning. Also a great book about the Dallas Cowboys as well. Great insights. If you haven't read that book about the Cowboys, it's just incredible because the insights he has about Jerry Jones and all of those guys down there in Dallas, just a history of the Dallas Cowboys and how they came to pretty much where they are now. How about them Cowboys? The author himself, Gary Myers, joins us now here on 97.3 ESPN. Gary, how you doing today?
Great tonight, Josh. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. This NFC East, it's incredible of how ridiculously poor all these teams are. I mean, did you even think it could be this bad coming into the year? I don't think anybody did.
No, I actually thought the Cowboys were going to be pretty good. Their offense is explosive, at least it was, before Dak got hurt and the whole offensive line went out. I had no idea, and I'm sure they didn't either, how bad the defense was going to be. But I thought I didn't think this was going to be a Super Bowl year for them, but I thought they would win the division fairly easily and then, have a chance to maybe win a game or two in the playoffs. But it's just, they can't stop anybody. They gave 34 points to the Giants. And the Giants have only averaged, I don't even know what it is, like 13 or 14 points in their other games. And then the other three teams are just, they're horrible. The Giants are bad, the Eagles are bad, Washington's really bad. It's a far cry from the days in the 1980s, and I'm sure you're too young to remember any of this stuff, but when you had Landry and Parcells and Gibbs and Buddy Ryan and, before the Cowboys, started having problems, 80s. Those four coaches and those four teams, that was the best football I've ever seen play. And to think that all these years later, it's by far the worst division and could get historically bad before it's all said and done.
You touched on how bad the Cowboys were. Let's start with them specifically because without Dak Prescott, it's so obvious how much this team was flawed. And now without him covering up a lot of those flaws, you have Ezekiel Elliott fumble the ball twice. Like they paid him before they paid Dak. And it just seems like all the flaws and all the issues in the Cowboys organization are just coming now to the surface now that Dak is out for the year.
Yeah, I'm not going to criticize the Cowboys for how they handled the Dak situation. They offered him a 5-year contract before training camp started, all through the off season. They had over $100 million guaranteed. And it was a 5-year deal, and he wanted a 4-year deal because he wanted to be in position to be renegotiated or negotiate again, in a shorter period of time. So I put that on him, and especially because, he didn't get the financial protection in the contract and played on a 1-year franchise tag. I hope he recovers and can be the same dynamic player that he was, for the first month of this season. But I thought that was a really bad decision on his part. So, they signed Zeke before they signed Dak. That's absolutely true. But they gave too much money to Zeke. But it's not like they didn't want to pay Dak. He just didn't want to take what they were offering. And but for a 4th-round pick after 4 years to be offered a contract with over $100 million guaranteed, it's really hard to criticize the Cowboys in that regard.
So then after watching last night's game, is it just they're just too injured? Is it a lack of continuity? We know the report came out today saying that players are not happy with the coaching staff. What do you point to for the disaster we saw last night?
It's easier to sit here and second guess hiring Mike McCarthy, that it wasn't a very inspired choice. They had a fallout with Aaron Rodgers towards the end of their time together in Green Bay. I know Aaron's not the easiest to coach, but he's a really smart guy. And to me, that was a red flag. Jerry wanted a proven coach. McCarthy won a Super Bowl, but that was a while ago. I don't know what kind of staff he went about putting together, but Mike Nolan obviously has not done a very good job as a defensive coordinator. But you can almost say this about every team, Josh. They've had a ton of injuries. And their offensive line is wiped out. They lost their quarterback. And the way that team is constructed now, the only way they were going to win games was by outscoring them in high-scoring games. And with Andy Dalton getting exposed last night, I don't think there's much optimism in Dallas that they can, win those 35-31 shootouts that they had been winning, or at least been involved in every week. So they're in big trouble. But again, you can say it about every team in the league. In all the years I've been around this, I really don't remember this early in the season having so many injuries and then so many key players among those who were injured. I mean, there's just a laundry list of big-name players who were either out for an extended period of time or out for the season. The only thing that's helping the Cowboys right now is the same thing that's helping the other three teams in the division. And the only reason they have hope is because the division is so bad, and somebody's got to make the playoffs. That's the way the rules are written. And if you look at these teams that nobody has more than 2 wins, and after 6 weeks, and one of them's got to win the division and they might wind up hosting a team that's won 4 more games than them in the wild card round.
Yeah, it's nuts. Gary Myers joining us here on the Boardwalk on the Hotline on 97.3 ESPN, New York Times bestselling author of books like How About Them Cowboys, also Brady versus Manny. You can follow him on Twitter at Gary Myers NY. Gary, let's look at the Eagles, because the last time you and I talked, the Eagles are coming off of arguably their worst game of the year, and it seems like they've gotten a little bit better, at least optically, since then. They've had 2 straight weeks now where they've put up a decent amount of points against 2 potential, Super Bowl contenders, and the Steelers and the Ravens, something the Cowboys couldn't do last night. The Cowboys scored 10 points. The Eagles are scoring almost 30 despite all of their injuries. What do you think about the Eagles, how they've found a way to kind of at least look like they're a better team? Maybe not they're winning games, but at least they look like a better team than week 1, where it looks like they couldn't do anything right.
Yeah, and they came on, strong at the end to make that score against the Ravens closer than it appeared that the game was for most of it. And if they made the 2-point conversion, they would have got it into overtime. And then you never know what's going to happen. That would have been a huge victory for the Eagles and could have really got them going on a nice run. I don't know. They have Miles. I haven't really followed what's happened down there the last 2 days, so I don't know whether is Miles Sanders going to play. I know Zach Ertz is out.
Miles Sanders and Zach Ertz are both out for at least, looks like 2 to 4 weeks. Okay,
so you lose your best pass catcher and your best running back, which is kind of what the Giants are out with, that Saquon Barkley and Sterling Shepard. And like I said, this is just like an epidemic almost. And I don't like using that word considering we're going through a pandemic, but it just seems that you look at any team and you can say out of the 10 best players going into the season, how many are they missing? And it seems everybody's missing at least 2 or 3 of their 10 best guys. So I thought the Eagles' shortcoming, before this whole thing got started, was they didn't have enough explosive weapons, especially at wideout. And I really haven't seen anything that would make you feel differently. I know they've gotten production from unexpected sources, but I don't know if that's going to sustain itself over the course of the season.
The other 2 teams, the NFC East, they both played each other on Sunday, and basically I think most people would agree that the Giants won because Ron Rivera gambled at the end because it's part of his nature. I mean, I think Washington has a good defense. I don't know what they're doing at quarterback. And the Giants, I mean, I don't know what on earth is going on with that team half the time, because I feel like the press conferences during the week with Joe Judge are more interested in their actual play on the field.
Yeah, they've been pretty dreadful offensively. The defense is getting a little bit better, although they were trying to protect a 7-point lead, and they let Kyle Allen go right down the field in the last 3 minutes. And that's another game that would have gone on to overtime. They only need to kick the extra point. But obviously Rivera thought that was his chance to win the game right there. They've just given up on Dwayne Haskins, it appears to me, that to be starting Kyle Allen and to have Alex Smith as the backup, and Haskins isn't even dressing. I know he's been ill lately, But that's what happens when you have a regime change, and the previous regime is responsible for taking the quarterback in the first round, and the next coach obviously has no loyalty to him because it wasn't his recommendation that they pick him. And now Rivera's playing his backup quarterback from Carolina. And it appears that Washington will be in the market for a quarterback yet again after this season. I certainly wouldn't count them out of the Trevor Lawrence derby, although I think that the Jets pretty much have that locked up because they haven't won a game, and I don't see a game that they're going to win. But, the most amazing stat, Josh, about the NFC East is the 4 teams have combined for 5 victories. And there are 6 teams in the NFL that have 5 victories. So combined, the NFC East has only equaled the victories of 6 other teams.
It's
just amazing. It is. And with the Giants, you had the transition to a new coach and a new staff with limited talent. And I do like him as a coach. I like what I'm hearing from him, and apparently the players really like him, which is important. But the Giants just don't have very much talent on that team. And Daniel Jones is yet to take that step in his second year that they were anticipating after he started 12 games as a rookie.
You mentioned the Jets. I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on them because the last time you and I talked, you had mentioned that if the Jets are serious about tanking for Trevor Lawrence, they would keep Adam Gase as their head coach for the year. Well, it's a few weeks into the season, but it looks like that little prophecy of yours might come true. Maybe if they do keep Adam Gase, they do go 0-16 because, even Joe Douglas is shaking his head up there in the press box, or at least the owner's box, because that came on the video during the game on Sunday. The Jets, oh my goodness. I thought the NFC East was bad. Then you go watch a Jets game and you realize, never mind.
Yeah, they're just not competitive. And at this point, see, if you get a stink, I happen to think this is a good year to stink because with no fans in the stands, you don't have to put up with the verbal abuse that you otherwise would. You can imagine, those fire Gase chants would have started in the season opener. And, they actually played Buffalo in the opener in their first home game. And it would have been, protests in the parking lot and all that. Now, the only thing that, the fans can voice their displeasure on the radio or, the negative stories that are showing up on the newspapers and the websites. But the teams, the coaches, the players can tune that out. They don't have to listen to the radio. They don't have to read anything. But if there are fans in the stands, then you're getting immediate feedback that you can't avoid. And I think the lack of that will help the Jets this year keep Gase for the entire season if that's what they want to do. Because without having to face their fans, the Jets can kind of pretty much do what they want. And then they'll be in a desperate situation after the season to hire a coach who has a tremendous amount of credibility that will be able to coach Trevor Lawrence. And if they don't wind up with the first pick, at least get enough talent around and get Sam Darnold straightened out. But the key for the Jets will be they can't hire a first-time head coach. They can't hire a failed head coach. And I've suggested a few times that if the Saints win the Super Bowl or Drew Brees retires after the year, and I think Brees is going to retire, then maybe that'll be the time that Sean Payton is ready for a new challenge and $15 million a year in total control. And maybe the Jets can make a Parcells-type hire from the late 90s and bring Sean Payton in. It's going to take something like that to get their fans to come back next year.
He's Gary Myers. Make sure to follow him on Twitter at Gary Myers NY. Also, he's the host of the new podcast, The GOAT, Tom Brady. Gary, tell us a little bit about that podcast because I read your book, Brady versus Manning, which is an excellent book. So tell us a little bit about the podcast and what you're doing with that.
Yeah, Josh, what I've done is it's a 12-episode podcast in which I really trace Tom's football career and some of the things going on in his life off the field, and used a lot of the audio from the interviews I did for that book. So it's one thing to read some of the quotes in the book. It's another thing to be able to listen to them. And nobody's ever heard these interviews before, and I only use some of it in the book. So I try to work in just about everything that Brady and I talked about when I did the book. And then it's just interviews with so many other people like Peyton and Kraft and Archie and Tom's dad and current and former teammates. So it, I think it's really, I think it's a fun listen. Fans are split on Brady, whether you either love him or hate him, but I think this appeals just to football fans in general because he is a really intriguing guy and has had just a fabulous career. And I've gotten a lot of good feedback on it. So it's my first venture into the world of podcasts, and it's been fun so far.
Well, I already got it loaded up on my Spotify, so I'm looking forward to listening to it again. That's The GOAT Tom Brady is the podcast. Of course, you can get it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you have your podcasting. He's Gary Myers, his old guest. He joined us here on the Boardwalk on the Hotline here on 97.3 ESPN. Gary, always appreciate the time and the conversation.
Take care, Josh. Have a good night.